Hi, my name is Terrence Gillespie. I'm a photographer and I live here on the Sunshine Coast. I grew up in Brisbane, but I spent a fair bit of time in Sydney. Originally, I was born in Lima, Peru, but my family moved to Brisbane, and I grew up on the south side of Brisbane. So I was introduced to the camera at a very young age. My mum, she gave me my first camera, and I believe that camera originally came from my grandfather Pedro. And I would just noodle around and not take it too seriously. And then at some point, maybe in my early teenage years, I started taking it a bit more seriously, and I was drawn to quite urban or industrial areas. My father worked in those kind of industries, so we were often around industrial areas, and I began photographing things like petrol bowsers and just industrial areas. And an interesting story is that after reconnecting with my family in Peru and looking at my grandfather's old photographs, he also was taking photos of old petrol bowsers and worked for a company that would install them. And so when they'd install them, he would take a photograph of proof that it was placed there. I mentioned before I got a camera from my mum at quite a young age, and a lot of the work that I was interested in happened to be industrial or urban environments. And and I would take photos of things such as petrol bowsers or industrial areas. And my dad worked within industry, and we were often in industrial areas. And it wasn't until I went and visited my family back in Peru that I found out that my grandfather Pedro, who he worked for a company that made and installed petrol bowsers. So there was, I guess, it's some chance or serendipity involved there. And I just found that interesting at a young age that there was that similarity, and I think maybe that encouraged me to keep pursuing photography. Yeah, and this is my grandfather's camera. He gave this camera to my mother on her first trip to New York when she might have been 15. I think that says May 1963. And she's handed it on to me, and I have put some rolls through it, but it is a little bit precious now. Another interesting part of that was some of my first skateboard photographs also had the petrol bowsers in them as well. And I began shooting skateboard photography, and that really taught me a lot about the importance of having a process and a routine, and the importance of doing the work and not just waiting for inspiration. I guess as my photography work developed, I became more interested in the relationships between objects in the frame, and a lot of my work revolves around observation and repeatedly visiting certain locations. And some of the interesting things that I've noticed, particularly in some of the busiest places, is that some of the places with the largest population, there's what I like to call some form of micro-migration, where those loudest places can also become the most empty and the quietest. And I think that's what I look for in the frames that I shoot, is trying to capture not the emptiness, but the idea about how a place that can be so loud can become so silent, and that silence is what allows me to have the time to create those frames. So I get a particular buzz out of being in some of those locations, having the time and the silence to make decisions about what I include and exclude from the frame. But also there's a fair bit of patience involved in terms of making sure that the lighting conditions are just right. So in terms of my current work, one part of my practice or process of making images that I'm very interested in is the making deliberate decisions about what is included and excluded in the frame. Particularly what is excluded in the frame, I'm trying to make it clear or deliberate, or make it hard for the viewer to carbon date the work. And that idea of removing reference to time is important to me because I feel it gives the work a bit more of a dream-like essence, or what memories feel like, where not everything is completely clear. And in the end, they are my memories, and that's what I hope the viewer takes on when they're looking at the work, is that they can look at the frame or the picture or the empty space and fill it with their own experience or their own memories. Yeah, so that idea of micro migrations or the movement of people is something that I'm fascinated in, and the French anthropologist Marc Augé has a term for that called non-places. In his book Non-Places, has this idea of spaces of transience where humans remain anonymous, and a space that does not have enough defining qualities to even be considered a place. So that idea of emptiness or non-places interests me. The ideas of spaces like a shopping mall after hours, or motels, or an airport. And I think I'm trying to find some essence in those places. Yeah, and it is that micro migration of people that enables me to have the time and the space to create some of those images. And I think that's sort of an interesting dichotomy, or a comment on society as well. Another series that I'm working on, Smoko Chairs, depicts a lot of makeshift chairs in industrial spaces, which could only be captured, after hours or on weekends or public holidays. Well, one of the defining qualities of a lot of my more recent work is that some of them can look painfully symmetrical or very grid-based, and I think that's informed from my work as a graphic designer, always trying to work with grids and guidelines and type and text boxes and trying to find balance. And I think that balance in some ways is a way that I'm trying to express my photography. And so with some of my more recent work that I've entered in some of the exhibitions, I have been trying to be less rigid, and what I've found is taking a step slightly to the side can create this whole nother level of dimensionality, and things that I would have in the past been a little bit unsure about. I feel I'm a bit more free and more open to explore what does it look like if it's not completely symmetrical or grid-based. Yeah, in terms of process, it's something that I've been thinking quite a lot about, and it's probably as a response to entering a bunch of different art prizes, is that to me photography is a way for me to not only interact but trying to understand the world. And as I mentioned before, a lot of that work revolves around observation and repeatedly visiting places. I might visit a place days apart, weeks apart, months apart, at different times of day. And what I've found is that a lot of it doesn't involve taking a photograph, it involves a lot of observation. But what that allows me to do is to ingest or process my own images, and sometimes that might happen 6 months after I've taken it, but it gives you this clarity when revisiting your work. And I think the work that I'm creating now is a response to, all of the world that we're taking in, but I'm trying to then frame it or express it in a way that may be beautiful or show signs of solitude, or just displaying or showing the world as I see it. Yeah, as I mentioned before, part of the observation is repeatedly visiting places, days apart, weeks apart, months apart, but one common denominator in that is public holidays. I find that I often go out to places on public holidays, usually because of that micro migration or exodus of people from certain work or business areas. And I will spend my time just observing, either walking or riding a bicycle or driving and I have a pretty good memory, so I have places that I revisit to see what it's saying to me at that particular time. And yeah, I may take 5 images that day or 40, but I tend to just tuck them away and not be too quick to try and process or make sense of it at the time. Mm-hmm. And then maybe 3 or 6 months later, I have an archive where then I'm able to go through that work and look upon it almost as a third person or as a voyeur, as if it's maybe someone else's work. And that being able to take that step away is super important, because then you look at the work differently. So I was fortunate enough to work at a commercial photo lab as one of my first jobs, and what that allowed me to do, apart from processing and printing tens of thousands of rolls, was I got to see commercial photographers work before they saw it. Back when, before digital. So I was able to make decisions or form opinions about what I considered to be a good image, and then that allowed me to start to have ideas about what I wanted to include in my frame. And so I still do use a range of film and digital cameras. One interesting thing with film photography is that most people who are shooting film at some point want to show it on a screen, so there is a transition to digital at some stage. And although film has some unique qualities in the silver halide that digital will never capture, I think that the tool is probably not the most important part, and as a lot of people say, the best camera is the one that you have on you at the time. So the work in the local contemporary art prize this year, I was super excited first of all when I was accepted, and it was a huge surprise and honour to receive an award. So that work was part of a journey I went on at Christmas last year. I made a road trip to Winton, to the Age of Dinosaur Museum, and that trip produced a number of pieces. The piece in the art prize was Anarchy Street, and that was shot in Emerald on, I believe it was New Year's Eve this year. And I was just driving through trying to get to the next town, and I was stopped in my tracks by the brightness of the yellow I was stopped in my tracks by the brightness of the yellow wall, and also, I don't know, the symmetry and some of the shadows there. So yeah, it was quite a serendipitous moment, and I didn't really revisit that image until there was a deadline looming for the prize. Part of that trip though, I did make a book, which I tend to do. I just print out all the work and then display it in chronological order, and with not too much thought about the arrangement. It's part of the process is just getting all the imagery, printing it so that you can view it and it's tactile, and then make decisions about what you like and don't like later. This is the book that I made as part of that trip, Stardust. And the interesting thing is, when I made this book, the image from Anarchy Street that's in the exhibition isn't in the book. It was a different image that I took that was more symmetrical and more straight on. Yeah.
Well, actually, because this I found such a refined, well-composed image. I loved the idea that the sublime can be found in the banal. And the longer I looked at this work, the more I was impressed, not only by its formal attributes, but its humour. For me, I found it humorous. The pops of colour, quietly but brightly, asserting their place in the world. And so the winner of the 2D prize is Terrence Gillespie.
Yeah, the first emotion was probably that of surprise. You always go to, first of all, being a finalist, I think, is winning for starters, or people acknowledging your work. But yeah, I think it was probably a surprise, but then there's also a great sense of gratitude associated with that as well. and the idea that everyone's work is super amazing and valid, and obviously judging is so subjective. So yeah, it was. I was probably surprised and also honoured to be selected. Yeah, so I used to enter prizes maybe, I don't know, a fair while ago, and I did take a break. Since moving to the Sunshine Coast in the last 10 years, I have been more active in entering prizes both locally and nationally. And yeah, and I think one of the important parts about entering prizes is that first of all, there's nothing like having a deadline, but secondly, it really makes you evaluate and put your work into words, or try and it makes you try and get to the essence of what your work means, and that's a super important process. And if the only takeaway from entering prizes is to be able to succinctly say your why, or the why you do the work, I think that's probably enough reason to enter prizes on its own. So I think first of all, the most important thing is to enter and get in there and have a go, and not be too disappointed if your work isn't selected. It's all part of a process, and I've entered many prizes or competitions where you weren't in the top percentage that was selected, but my suggestion would be to just keep entering and just be persistent. And yeah, I think it's important to just start that process and really think about why you make the work. I'm also interested in typography. As a graphic designer, I've long been a user of fonts, and I've started this process of wanting to create and design my own typefaces. For me, next is probably just continuing on my practice. I feel going through this process with the Caloundra Gallery, and also being part of the Up Late, having to present my work, it has really helped me focus on my why and my process. And I think it's important to take breaks, but obviously think about what the next project is, or what the next version or evolution of the work might be. I think it is just trying for me to distill or understand the world we live in. I think some people can do it through poetry or music. For me, it's by taking photos and curating them, and then presenting back to the world my vision of what the world is.